your words hold a lot of weight and a lot of respect for putting yourself out there. You seem to have a really good finger on the pulse of what gamers want, but you equally have the knowledge and the finger on the pulse of what is acceptable and doable now. But you seem to be frustrated, might be putting words in your mouth. I don't want to say that. But much more vocal about this big game discussion, Half-Life Alyx continuously on repeat. Is there something going on lately that has made you want to be a little more vocal and bring us back to maybe a grounded reality?
Yeah, I think I've always said, like over the last 8 years, it's always been a struggle for VR studios to gain any kind of meaningful funding to do anything big. And there's some obvious reasons for that. It's the economy of scale. It's not a big market. It's still not a big market. It's getting much bigger and it's becoming a lot more stable. And we're one of the small handful of studios that's actually done well recently, mostly because of Quest 2. So I guess the frustration is more around the kind of ire and spite and anger from the consumers who are looking for the next big Half-Life Alyx, and every earnest game studio that's doing VR pours their blood, sweat, and tears into this small thing that they can afford to build, and everybody kind of dumps on it because it's not Half-Life Alyx. But it's super important to understand that to earn Half-Life Alyx kind of money, you have to have Half-Life Alyx kind of production budgets, and no one does. Only Valve has Half-Life Alyx production budgets. And VR OEMs, the people making the hardware, have depending on the time of year, you'll get different amounts from them for different things, but the pitch process is difficult, and you've got to get just the right thing. But it's important to recognize, I guess, that this is all a risk reward thing for small studios or medium-sized studios. Cloudhead Games is a 30-person studio, which is pretty big for VR, like, because there's not that many. But and we dump almost all of our money is in paying our employees industry standard rates to work on Pistol Whip primarily. And it's not just the production staff, it's everything, all the other people you have to hire to support those people. So it's HR and management and finance and somebody dealing with hardware issues, and like the bigger you get, the more complicated that puzzle becomes. But I just wanted to give some perspective because people might look at Pistol Whip as a smaller game, but to support that small thing, to keep pumping out content and to support the community and all that stuff, it's still a 30-person studio doing that small thing. So take a Half-Life Alyx and multiply that by 10. That's the kind of budgets you're talking about, and that's well out of reach of almost everybody. Like just hands down, it just doesn't happen. So
when it comes to this the ability where you need, I mean, I'm with you all the way. Pistol Whip seems like that game, the forever game that is going to get you closer and closer to getting to those. But I don't know, I might have misread this tweet, but it seems like Cloudhead Games, it's not just the projects we see, it's not just the gallery, it's not just Aperture Hand Lab and Pistol Whip. There is a catalog, a war chest of games like Pistol Whip try to fund that may be greenlit. You mentioned some other big IPs that could have been almost greenlit. I wasn't sure if you were referring to Cloudhead Games endeavors or if that was just a general statement across the board.
I think that comes from two perspectives, our own, because there's been a number of near misses, I guess I'll call them. But it's just like talking to our peers over the years. Everybody's got those stories about big IP or bordering on AAA style games, deep graphics and great gameplay and big teams. So yeah, the near misses are a kind of a frustration, but an understandable one in a weird way, because how can I speak to this without saying things? But like,
you could just say things.
Essentially, like, there have been many times with our studio, with other studios, where you've almost had complete buy-in on an IP that makes total sense for the medium, and it's VR centric, and it's an IP that just fits. It makes sense for VR. And often that falls down when you start negotiating IP rights and the amount of money, a game IP or a Hollywood IP might want to use that IP. That always tends to fall down, because then you get into the actual economics of, well, how big is the VR market? How many headsets exist? And when you explain that to those IP holders, they're like, well, that's just not enough money. Or this isn't a big enough audience, or it's just kind of not worth it, right? So that is often the discussion. And I think things are starting to soften there because of the relative success of VR since 2019 and moving. We've kind of done the hockey stick thing where now it's really, kind of booming in a way. So I think some of those doors will open up again very slowly, but there's been, I guess the thing is, it was always a chicken before the egg conversation with the people making the hardware. It's like, guys, the only way we're really going to catapult the hardware is if we have awesome software that isn't just a small experience that a dev can safely afford. Because it's always a risk mitigation thing for your small studio. You're paying these people, they have kids and they have car payments and mortgages, and you can't take big risks. You got to take the conservative, responsible path, right? But trying to get buy-in from the OEMs to say, like, you need this stable of games to really drive hardware sales. It doesn't, and even if you go further back with, just game console launches, it was pretty typical to launch a new game console, an Xbox or PlayStation, whatever, and for those companies to pay outright for content with the launch of the hardware. So there was a bit of a weird disconnect, I think, early on with that, and there was a trickle of money, and different companies did give certain amounts of money, but it was always never quite enough to like do the big thing. So you had a lot of studios like ours, like in 2018, we could have released a big thing, but we just didn't have the resources to do that. But that story is like endemic. Every VR studio that's stuck around this long will tell you a story like that.
Are you able to share what that might have been in 2018?
No. I wouldn't, because that could still happen. Like I said, the things are softening up, so there's possibilities around a whole bunch of things. So the VR market of today is still, it's kind of like trying to filter out the things that kind of went wrong. And everybody's switching their mindset right now to go, oh, okay, VR is actually taking off now. All the promise of the Gartner hype cycle thing that everybody talked about, VR is actually now starting to do the thing, and it's provable. Like, our studio has, a X number behind it because we've profited from the success of the platform. So now it's a provable thing, but everybody's sort of having to switch their old baggage, they get it out of there so that they can get their heads around this. And that includes the OEMs, the hardware makers, and studios who are building content.
Hit that subscribe button to stay on top of the daily clips, or catch the debates and Fireside Chats live on the main channel down in the video description. See you next time, Space Cowboys.